My name is Denise Mashmasarmi. I am the Associate Director of the Center for Inclusive Excellence. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
And I am Annabella Morbido, and I am Assistant Dean of Student Affairs here at Regis, and I use the she series pronouns.
All right, so we have some great folks with us here today, and we'll just dive in and start with introductions. So for our panelists, if you can please state your name, your pronouns, where you're calling from, your role at Regis, and then just give us a brief snippet of your first gen story. I can, repeat any of those if you need me to.
My name is Samantha. I'm a second-year nursing student at Regis College. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm calling from Hawaii. I'm here for a travel nursing assistant contract assignment. My role at Regis, I am also a lacrosse player. I am part of the Student Nursing Association SGA rep. I'm the SGA rep for the Student Nursing Association, and I'm also part here of the First Gen Task Force and representing as a student rep. And a snippet of my first gen story is that both my parents are Brazilian. My mother only completed 8th grade and my dad only completed 4th grade in Brazil. So me and my sister were the first generations in America and the first generation to receive a higher education in our family.
I'll go next. My name is Dr. Jonathan Fitzgerald, but most students call me Professor Fitz. I am an assistant professor of humanities and general education at Regis. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm calling from beautiful Swampscott, Massachusetts on the North Shore of Boston. And I am the first in my family to attend college and then to attend graduate school and then to obtain a PhD. And my younger sister also went to college and has a master's, and that's sort of our story. So.
I guess I'll go next. Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Henry Kronner, and I'm an associate professor in social work. And my pronouns are he, him, his. And I'm calling you from somewhat overcast Fort Lauderdale. We have made it through the big storm that came through yesterday. So when you're all talking about the nice weather up where you have, let's just say that you've had nicer weather than we've had down here. I am the first in my family. My parents have high school diplomas. My mother worked really hard for hers. The idea in her family was that there was no need to go past 8th grade, and she fought her father and got the high school diploma. My two siblings who are older were in community college, and I was the first to go away to college, the first one to get a master's, and the first one to get a doctorate. And I think that's all about me.
How you doing? I'll go next. I am Dr. Dariel D.T. Henry, and I have two roles in here. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm calling you right now from Pawtucket, Rhode Island. My two roles that I am representing right now at Regis, I am an admissions consultant for the Regis Diverse Educators Program, and I help Regis with some diversity recruiting. Also at Bristol Community College, I am the director of TRIO, where TRIO is a federally funded program that works with students that are first generation. So I get to spend $1 million a year on first gen students. And so I love my job. A little snippet about my first gen story. I was originally a college football player. So I got a scholarship to go to college at a small junior college out in Franklin, Massachusetts. That's how I know about Massachusetts. I had never been out of Florida before. And I remember when I went to the airport, I had not been on a plane before, and I actually missed my first flight. But I still ended up getting on a flight and getting to Franklin. And I remember I was told to go see the bursar. And so I go on campus and I walk into this office and I ask to see Miss Bursar. And I come to find out there is no one named Miss Bursar that's actually in office. But when I went to the office and asked for Miss Bursar, everybody kind of looked at me. But this one woman looked at me and said, "I'm Miss Bursar." And she called me over and she then explained to me what a bursa was and started talking to me about higher ed. And I didn't know I was first gen at that moment, but that was a first gen experience that I had. And I'm glad I had someone at the college that was able to help me out. And we'll share some of that during this panel with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for sort of sharing a little bit of who you are. We're excited to hear more from each and every single one of you. And a lot of you have already introduced themes that we'll be covering later in the panel. I know Samantha talked about being first gen in the US, and we're going to talk about that. And DT talked about this experience of not knowing you were first gen until you were in college, and we're certainly going to talk about that. So we're going to move on to our second question. I also want to invite anyone in the audience to place questions in the chat box, in the YouTube chat box, and we will be receiving them and asking them if time permits. So for our second question, I want to ask each of you to define what does first gen mean to you? What does being first gen mean to you? And what has that experience been like for you?
I'll jump in. So, I mean, that was, I love this question. And I think it comes down to one thing, which is that education has the power to change lives. I mean, that's really what it means. My parents were really hard workers. They instilled a work ethic in me as well. And they worked really hard to make sure that my sister and I could get a really good education because they knew that sort of there were opportunities out there that we would not have access to if we didn't have a college education. So it was really important when I was first looking at colleges, that practical element, you know, like I knew I was into writing and literature and stuff. But the big question was like, well, what kind of job can you get? You know, like that was really what was waiting on the other side. But beyond that, I mean, the experience of attending college has, you know, really meant like lifelong friends. I mean, my wife went to the same college as me. It's a world that I just didn't know about and didn't have access to. And there were conversations that were happening that I would have never encountered had it not been for the experience of attending college. And I mean, obviously, and I think this is the case for a lot of us here, we had such a good time. It was so important to us. It was so empowering, and it so changed our lives that we kind of just didn't want to stop, right? And that's certainly my story, which is why I'm still here. So yeah, I mean, that's what it boils down to. You know, it's a life-changing experience. It was going to college. It was 4 years that meant that everything was going to be different after that.
I can actually relate to that story as well, and I feel like that kind of ties into what I think first generation means to me. My mother always valued, like, I practically was raised by just my mother, me and my sister. So she came from a very, very low income household in Brazil. Like they barely would have anything to get by. And she was the first one to come here to America and really sacrifice everything. And she really helped her whole entire family get to a better financial situation in Brazil. And not only, I feel like her teachings on me and my sister was always like, you don't want to do what I do for work. Not that her job it's honest work. So she just wanted us to be in a comfortable financial situation and not have to sacrifice like so much of our lives just to be in a good place financially. And that's was the importance of education, how she said for us to study and always make sure we have a good head on our shoulders. So yeah.
Yeah, for me, first generation, I don't think I even knew what that was until much later in my life. It's just something I was without necessarily having a label attached to it. But going off of DT's comment, yeah, I just didn't know. So I look at my siblings' kids, and they were told, like, this is how you apply to college. This is what you do. So, I mean, I did well in high school. I mean, it wasn't too hard. Thank goodness, that was actually not too bad. But the problem was I didn't really know how to study. I didn't know what to expect when I got to college. And so here I go to a school that's much more challenging, and I wasn't prepared. And my parents, they would ask me, how are you doing? And I'd be like, I'm doing fine. I'm passing my classes. They didn't ask me for my grades. At that point, I'm an adult, and they just assumed I'm passing. Like, okay. So I didn't really have a lot of support. I didn't know how to work the system. And I could easily see asking for either Mr. or Ms. or Mrs. Bursar, because that would make total sense to me. Like, yes, it sounds like a name. And so I just felt like I was often unaware of what needed to happen. I felt that I was on my own a lot. And so I love that I can see my nieces and nephews, they're given guidance. I went to the school that I did because they were on my high school campus or high school, and they were, schools would come in and try to get you to go to their university. And I remember showing up to it and coming home for dinner, and my family's like, "What did you do today?" And I said, "Oh, there was a presentation from the University of Michigan." And my family's like, "Oh my gosh." And I was like, "Is it a good school?" And they're like, "Oh, I had no idea. I wasn't into sports." So my family at least knew the sports. And so for them, they were like, "Yes." And my parents were like, "Well, if you get accepted, we'll make that happen." Okay. I mean, I applied because literally I got lucky on this stuff because I didn't know a good school from a bad school. I didn't know different levels of education. I just knew that there were colleges and universities out there and you just apply. So not a lot of guidance. And so again, for me, the first generation is just not being very aware. And I know as we go through the questions, we're going to talk about strengths and stuff, and I'll be able to show you, hopefully be able to tell you all about some of the benefits that I've gotten from this experience. But that's what it meant for me, is just being often unaware.
Okay, I think I'll go last. Um, I like what I won't try to say what some of the other folks have said already, just to not be so redundant, and look at it from a different spin. I was pretty smart in high school. I knew how to study and all of that. And since I played football, I was very aware of colleges. So I knew, like Henry said about University of Michigan, so I knew the University of Miami, Florida State, all that. I'm from South Florida, so it's all about the U down there. And so I knew about college, right? And I had the desire to go, but I think what we're going to touch base on is the how. You can have the desire, but the how. How do you get these things, and how do you get that answer that you want? And so as I was going through college, I learned a lot about the operations of a college and what it meant to study abroad and how easily I could do that with college money, and or how easily I could get involved in these other programs. And I didn't realize how much it was changing my family until I started going home and I was helping my nieces and nephews. And I would drill down to them about their academics or questions about college. And I remember once I was talking to my little niece, and her friend was with us, and her friend said, "You sound like you're a college professor." At that point, I was like in my master's degree or something. And I had been through college enough that I just knew the questions to ask. And I think that's a big part of being first gen for me is knowing what a college can do for you, and what they can't. There's so many students that don't realize that when they, you could talk to a college and work out a payment plan, or you could get on a research committee with the professor, or you end up going to all these conferences, or if you really become an RD, or back then as a student, you would be a RA. If you become an RA, what that does for your room and board, or how you learn how to then plan programs and do roommate contracts or whole residence hall meetings. All of those things prepared me for the leadership that I do now. And that was outside of the classroom. So when I think about being first gen, I look at going from your high school, coming into a college, learning about the entire world of higher education, that operations side, and just how so many things are interconnected and how they run together. So that was a big thing for me to understand.
Thank you all. I feel like so many pieces of each of your stories I can relate to. And we know, like, at least for the ones who work in higher ed, we know that there's like a national definition for first gen. We know that institutions have their own definitions. But once you start to realize, oh, I am first gen, you start to define what that is to you. So thank you. And so at what point did you all realize that that was an identity that you held?
I'll jump in. I don't want to always be the first one, but this is actually the question that I've been waiting for, because this is one of my favorite stories, and a story that I tell, although it's not as good as the bursar story. That's just solid. But it's along those same lines. And it's a story I tell my students every semester almost. It comes up sort of organically every semester at Regis. So I think I was a freshman. I was in Dr. Stein's American Literature, I think it was early American Literature course. And, he was a quintessential English professor. It kind of reminded me of Sean Connery a little bit. He's got the graying beard. He was just, he was an icon to me. Even then, I was like, this is the guy. And we're sitting in a circle, it's that kind of class. And I don't even know how we got there from it's an English class. So how did you get from early American literature to he's talking about being the first generation college student? Although I don't think we were using that term. I don't remember using that term. But anyways, he gets around to asking, who in this class, for example, is the first in their family to go to college. And so I shoot my hand up. I'm so proud. I'm the first in my family to go to college. And then I look around and nobody else has their hand up. I was the only one in that class who was the first. And in that moment, the pride I felt immediately turned to embarrassment. And I was like, oh no. And I tell that story because I never ask my students that question. I never pose that question because I don't want that situation to happen. But I do make it very clear that I am a first generation college student and want to be a resource for students for that reason. But man, that's just, when do you come into awareness? It was that moment of realizing I'm alone on this and everyone's looking at me. But it turns into a good story over time. So that's my moment of awakening there.
I can go second with this one since I went last on the other ones. And I told you all about, my bursar story is, realizing my identity. I didn't know I was technically first gen, quote unquote, right? Years later, as I was, I think it was in my junior year, I was then at University of Central Florida where I met my mentor. And he said, oh, you're first gen like me. And that's when I got the understanding of it. And I didn't realize what he was doing in mentoring me, but he was doing what I do now, and he was showing me all the resources that I could get as a first gen student, and that's when I really began to understand the things that I was missing. Before, I thought nobody knew if I didn't know it, nobody else knew it. I just felt we all didn't know it together. What they found it out some way. I just figured I had to ask my own person, right? Like maybe they asked their parents, but I got to ask my coach. So I didn't know that it was there. And it was kind of good because I was naive about it. So I just had all this confidence, and I just started walking in the buildings after the bursar situation to say, I don't know who I'm here to speak to, but I'm here for this. And then people would tell me, what it was, and and then I would go from there. So like I said, my junior year is when I realized that term and what it was. And then I started, focusing more on what the difference was being first gen and, versus second generation or something like that. And then noticing all the things that I was gathering on my own. And I did a pretty good job, became Dr. Henry, but I noticed it then, so.
For me, I think at a young age, I always knew I was a little different than my peers. At the age of 7, first grade was when I really understood, okay, I speak 2 languages, my parents are Brazilian, I have to translate almost all the time I'm in public, or I had to understand that, this is I'm a little different than most kids. And I remember I was probably second grade or something, but at the time I was already in Brazil. We decided to live in Brazil for 3 years during my childhood, because my mother thought it would be better there to live financially, and that was not the case, and we returned. And so I always knew it was a little challenging, and a lot of the kids had a lot of help from their parents, and they would say, oh yeah, my mom helped me with my homework and my dad helped me with this. I'm like, Mom, like, can you help me with this? She's like, I don't even know what that is. I was like, 3rd grade. And she's like, I don't know, good luck. Try your hardest. I was like, oh, okay. So me and my sister kind of like, were like, understood each other. And we understood that we had to try a little harder and push a little harder and study a little harder just to catch up with our peers. So especially coming back from Brazil, leaving like the US, I was born in the US, but leaving the US at a young age, living in Brazil, having to readapt, come back to America and start at like middle school and kind of like, okay, I missed like most of my fundamental years of my life. So I was really behind and I had to play catch up at almost. And it took me until like 8th grade to really grasp the importance of high school and getting into college. And I'm just thankful my sister paved the way for most of it. So that's a little snippet of my identity of as First Gen.
And for me, I'm probably the oldest person on this panel. I don't think we had that, like, I don't remember that term in college. I do remember just being different. Like there were many of us who were First Gen when I went to school. I mean, it was quite a few of us. But it was a difference compared to those who had parents or grandparents who had gone to college. I think that they were able to have that guidance that I just didn't have. And so everything was always new for me. Everything was different. I was still trying to learn the subjects that I was studying, plus trying to figure out this very difficult maze of academia. And so I think the term is when I finally knew what it was, is probably when I began to teach at a school where we had a lot of first generation. And I was like, oh, that's the term that we use. And that also then helped me figure out how I could be of support and help guide people so they could become successful and that it wasn't so confusing to them. And so I think having that experience allowed me to hopefully have some empathy for others who are in that same position.
You know, I'm so glad all of you shared different aspects that I think are relatable, because I know our first year PI students are sitting watching this event right now, and so many of them have expressed, you know, similar experiences, and that, you know, that pride of like, I'm the first one in my family, and then realizing you're the only one in your classroom. And so I think it feels, I know as someone who identifies as First Gen, it feels nice to know that there's other people. And that it is an identity that we should take pride in. And I think that, and sort of segueing to our next question, there's other identities that intersect with being First Gen, and more often than not make that experience, you know, maybe harder or maybe easier. And so we wanted to ask about that. And Samantha, you've touched on this beautifully, talking about your identity as an immigrant, but well, not you, but your mom and the impact that it had on your life. So I wanted to ask, and anyone who wants to share, feel free. We certainly don't have to listen from all of you if you don't have an answer to this, but what are some of the intersecting identities that have also contributed to your First Gen experience? And how did they interplay with being First Gen?
I can go first this time. Switch it up a little bit. So I have a couple identities as I was going to college. Number one, and I'll explain to you how they contributed to my First Gen experience. So I'll break it down as I go. So number one, as y'all can see from camera, I am a Black man in America. And so being that you know, as a Black young man in America, I'm coming in with a certain history, understanding that, you know, being the first is not odd considering our place in this country. So I wasn't bothered by being the first. I understood that, you know, it might be my position. I also am a true fan. My favorite scholar is Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, and he was the first Black man to get a PhD from Harvard, and he was very confident about his abilities when he was at Harvard, and I studied him a lot. So just looking at my history of, you know, Carter G. Woodson, Booker T. Washington, Malcolm X, you can name all the greats, I knew that I had a right to education. So just being Black in America, I knew that. And I knew that it was important because it used to be illegal to learn how to read. So whenever something is illegal like that, you got to look at it and see it must be a deadly weapon. So I knew that getting an education was important. So being Black, that came into play. As a football player, with that identity, I had the understanding that it's a long season. And, how you start in the beginning may not be how you end up. And that, you're trying to win a championship. So, and that's done over a course of time. So coming into college, I was okay with entering new situations. In football, every week you got a new game, new opponents. Every year, people are training. And being a ball player, you understand that you have an opponent. So you have to fight against that. So my opponent, we'll get into some of this later with the imposter syndrome and all of that. I was okay with fighting against that because, as a football player, we go out there and you give it your best every day. The third identity is I'm PK. So I'm a preacher's kid, my father being a pastor. And so that brought me an understanding of faith. And so, whenever I had a struggling moment, I would reach back and think of the lessons that he gave me and think of, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Whenever I would go through a challenge, I thought about, yea, do I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. So that identity helped me out as well. And then being from Miami, if you ever met somebody from Miami, Florida, they say that's just a certain level of confidence that we have. And so we're a little bit different. And all of those contributed to that first gen experience. So I felt in some ways, like Dr. Fitz said, he was the only one and he was excited. So there were some days where I felt excited about being the only one from Miami, preacher kid, football player, being in the building. And I said, well, I'm just going to embrace this and give it all I got. So that contributed to my experience.
I have to follow that, DT, because it had me. So part of my story is I grew up evangelical Christian. So you have me saying, "Amen." I'm finishing the scriptures you're quoting. I'm right there with you, and that is a big part of my story. And it's interesting, talking about these intersecting identities. I like to think of it in terms of intersecting stories. Like what are identity. So even, in DT's case, like when you talk about your identity, you can't do that without telling a story. So what are the stories that sort of inform who you are and make up the person that you are? And in my list, growing up conservative, evangelical Christian, that's a big part of my story and part of that identity that does intersect. Not for the least of which reason is that I went to an evangelical Christian college. Actually, that was the place that I found myself because that was my whole life. I applied to one school and that was just the school that I would go to. And it followed after, being a youth group kid and going to church, several days a week. That was just sort of what was going to happen next. So that's a big part of my story that shows up. But then I think about other parts. I've always been conscious of my identity as a person with Irish and Italian heritage in Boston. It's like everybody else who, there's so many people, so many of us that are Irish and Italian. I think about my grandparents' story. That's a sort of, some people are Irish, some people are Italian. I'm actually both, because when my grandparents on my dad's side got married, it was like, back then it would have been considered sort of an interracial marriage, right? Irish and Italian mixing, like you didn't do that. That's been a part of my story, to know that that's something that they sort of did to inform the person that I became, and to be sort of a descendant of immigrants in that way is definitely a big part of it. I've also become, especially in college, but especially in the years since, really conscious of the story of privilege that comes with my skin color in the United States in the 21st century, right? Like that is a part of my story. Being a first generation college student was difficult for the reasons that we're discussing, but I know that it could have been more difficult, just based on that fact alone. So I just think that these intersecting identities, these intersecting stories, they really do sort of factor into the person that you are when you approach education and how you receive it. I like the way too that, when it comes to an identity, it feels kind of static, right? Like this is who I am. It's sort of, I don't know, it's almost non-negotiable. But if we talk about intersecting stories, it's like, well, that's meant to be shared and meant to be discussed and meant to be talked about. And so that's sort of the approach that I've been taking recently. And with my students too, they just tell me your story, like where are you coming from? What sort of makes you the person that you are? And I think that's sort of a really productive way to go about that. But so there's my story.
And I agree with you. I think the stories are extremely important. And for me, it was, DT is all about playing football and having all this ability to know sports and stuff. And again, as I said, I knew nothing. And so it took me a while until I went to a school that I think it was the first university that had an LGBTQ office on campus. And so coming out at the University of Michigan was sort of like not a big deal. Well, for everyone else, it wasn't. It was huge for me. But that is what allowed me to realize it was the importance of making connections. Because after I came out and I started to meet others who were like me and we had this connection, school just was so much better. It was so much more fun. It was so much richer. I think I was less stressed. And if I had questions, I felt like I had more people to ask for help. And so that identity ended up playing out and really helping me sort of figure out, how do I get through this? And you know, it was just, it made the whole experience much better for me. And then when I went for my master's, it was the same thing. It was like, I wasn't alone anymore. And again, that's one of the things that I think I try to work with students is hearing their stories, just as Dr. Fitz is saying, it is important to hear those stories. I think it's important that we encourage students to share their stories, but then figuring out how do we help as we hear those stories, helping people figure out where do they fit, because they all fit. We just got to figure out where they fit and where they want to be, so that we can move them forward and they can go on the path that they wish to go. So that was important for me to figure that out.
Okay, thank you all. And so a lot of you mentioned, the challenges of your first gen identity, and being first gen, yes, it comes with challenges, but once you add on all those other identities with that, it just gets that much more complicated. And if you were to Google first gen, you'd probably see a lot of, information about, the obstacles that students face and, the lack of access to X, Y, and Z. So instead of looking at first gen from a deficit mentality, we want to also think about the opportunities. And so what are some of the skills you gained in navigating this
identity? I guess I'll start. I think I was kind of embarrassed at first, but then in high school, I was like, wow, I'm kind of lucky because I am lucky that I have a single mom. I'm lucky that I come from a lower income, that I'm going to be granted scholarships if I work hard and I study hard, and paying for school is going to be a lot easier for me than someone who's a middle class American. And if they're struggling, just being middle class, I feel like they wouldn't be granted that many scholarships for their financial situation, or if they don't work as hard academically, they probably won't get as much merit scholarship. So I feel like for me, I was kind of happy that I have like the resources that were available to me, because without those resources, I would never ever go to college if I wasn't had those resources available to me. And of course, I worked hard for my education, and I really did my hardest and to try to get a good GPA and try to focus on getting into a school. But I also wanted to make sure I wasn't gonna be in so much debt. So I think for me, I just looked at whichever 13 schools that I applied to. I'm grateful that my counselor waived those application fees for me, because it's very expensive to apply to colleges. And out of those 13 schools, I really narrowed it down to which one had the best financial situation for me, and program and resources, opportunities. I wanted a smaller school, and that's how I came to Regis College. That I'm just so thankful for all the resources they have given me. So.
And to play off of that, I agree. The resources are extremely important. And so some of the skills I've learned is ask questions. I think that I'm a better problem solver because I did have to figure out how to solve a lot of things because I wasn't given guidance from my parents. And I did learn to ask many more questions. And then I think a piece of that is also I learned to develop relationships that, I mean, having a teacher who really was invested makes a difference. Just even having different staff on campus who knew different people, like, oh, I know someone in that office, I can call over and I can help you out there. Again, I realized, wow, these connections make life a lot better. And I've taken that skill with me throughout my whole life, is keep building those relationships as you apply for a job somewhere. It's like, this one knows this one. Maybe you get the job for being the person who was the applicant, but I think a lot of it is you make those relationships, you make those connections, and someone else knows of something that's available. So these may have been challenges at one point, but I think they've made me a stronger and a better person because of them. So I'm not unhappy at all that I've had them. I'm happy with what I've become from them.
I think this will build on this last question that we're talking about, the skills. And this is specifically for Dr. Fitz and Dr. DT and Dr. Kronner. I think that the experience of being a first-gen college student is certainly very salient. That's an identity that's just very salient when you're in college. But when you go into grad school or into a professional role, it kind of stays with you. And it definitely builds on the way you approach your role. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. For those of you who are now professionals, and Samantha, actually you are working as a travel nurse, so feel free to chime in as well. How has your first gen experience translated into your professional experience? Has it translated into it? And maybe some of the skills that you learned, how has it helped you in your professional experience?
I'll jump in. Am I alone? I don't think I'm alone in saying the phrase that comes to mind when I think about this sort of both the skills that I learned and also the way that they've transferred into my career is fake it till you make it, right? Like that's what I learned as being a first gen college student, was just at some point, maybe it was after that embarrassing moment, just to fake it until you make it. Like show up like you're supposed to be there and that you know what you're doing. And then just keep pushing forward that way. And that's really been, I'm saying it facetiously, but I also kind of mean it a little bit, that you just having that confidence to know like, well, I don't understand everything that's going on, but I know I can find people that can help me. And I know that, I've solved this problem behind me, this problem, I figured out the bursar, so I can figure out the next thing too, is the attitude. In terms of translating into a career, this is like, I am literally doing what I'm doing because of that experience I had as an undergrad, where I just decided, well, first of all, that life that I saw that my professors had was the life that I wanted. I wanted to be able to read and write and talk about reading and writing all day. That's basically what I wanted to do. And then I've also had the mission behind me the whole time that said, there's students like me that for whom this will literally be life-changing. This will change everything for them. And if I can be a part of that, like that's it. That's everything. And so I think it's given me the opportunity to really straddle different identities and to understand students that I wouldn't maybe have understood if I didn't have that same experience, or at least a piece of that experience being a first gen. It made me really want to be a bridge builder between different communities. Even coming up, and I said as part of my story, as part of my identity in evangelical circles, like understanding that now from where I sit, we sort of talk about those people over there and they're voting differently than I would vote. But I really feel like I grew up there, I can understand them and I can be a bridge between them. And that's been a big part of what I do. Somebody else mentioned empathy. That has to be a huge aspect, right? Like you've been there, you can experience it yourself. And so, yeah, there really is no Professor Fitzgerald if there isn't a first generation college student, because it was just that experience that was just so impactful. I knew that everything changed, and I wanted to be a part of that change for other people too. So that's where I'm coming from on that.
I'll jump in here second because my job now, my director's role is directly related to first gen students, and I saw out the role because of it. So just in my entire platform as a higher ed administrator and a leader in this field, is that I love to transfer information, and I love to find what students need and give it to them and give them those resources. That's what I do. So when I work with athletes and I'm doing tutoring or any type of academic advisor for them, I've always been able to have a different type of conversation with them, because being first gen myself, I can understand the energy in the room and just can tell by some body language that they may not be familiar with what I'm talking about. So when I was working with junior college players and we're talking about a credit authorization form, I could just look at them and see, you need me to break this down a little bit for you. And that's the same way the one Miss Bursar was, right, for me. So that's translated to my professional experience on one end. The other end is I know how to spend money. I know what it was when I was going through college and what I needed. And I know that first gen students sometimes think, this is meant for someone else. This isn't meant for me. I'm not gonna get it. But often they don't know how much the staff is looking for them. So I'm always pulling students in saying, no, just fill out this paperwork and it's going to work out for you. Trust me, you'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And some students think that it takes all of this, these hoops and hoops to get whatever funding that they may need, but it's not always the case, just filling out the form, but taking that first step. So that's one of the things. And then just being, in my professional work, just being an inspiration and a role model to a lot of students. Right now, in higher ed, I constantly am letting people know when I introduce myself, I'm Dr. Dariel D.T. Henry. I know that some people on campuses, they take that term and say, well, I pull out my doctorate when I need to. Well, I always need to, because I'm a role model. And not just to my community, the Black American community, but also to the first gen community. So I've had students brought to my office just because they didn't know another a man of color with a PhD. And so I've had staff members bring students to my office. So, all of that experience that I had of what I didn't see and what I didn't know and what I needed to find out, now not only do I work in it for one of my jobs, by day, I also work at Regis where I provide scholarships for students. So that's another avenue in which I'm doing this. And then all the work that I do outside of it's between mentoring and workshops and working with staff and faculty and helping them understand first generation students and things they may not know. I try to help out now, when, even something as simple as coming to campus knowing that you have to do laundry when you get to campus. A lot of students don't know that. So just being on the right committees and saying the right thing when I need to say it has been a way that I've translated this into my professional experience.
Okay, so we're going to dive into questions we received from the RSVP form or from the audience before we get to that last question. We'll end with that one. So how do you overcome imposter syndrome in college as a first generation student?
Y'all know I could take this. Y'all know my energy and my confidence is. How do I overcome? I didn't feel this until I got to. I had to question this when I got to my doctorate, and I remember being in class, and many people had different, higher positions than I had at the time, and one of the things that I thought of is that, I heard my father say this when he was preaching one time. He said, we all came here in different boats, but we're in the same boat now. And I'll never forget when he said it. And I forget what moment it was, but he said that, and I take it a different way, that, we all may have come from different places, but we're in the same classroom right now. I'm in here just like y'all. I don't know where you came from, what you got, but I made it here as well. And so that's one thing that I looked at. The other thing is, you might be the first in one room, but realize that if you took all those people to your side of town, they might be the first in one of your rooms as well. So, understanding that this is, you're just in this particular room and you're that first person. And then I really relied a lot on my history and just knowing that there are so many people in my history that had to be the first to do something. And so I took it as a responsibility and said, even if other people don't think I should be here, I'm meant to be here because this is my responsibility. Somebody has to step out and be the first. And so So that's how I sort of dealt with it.
I think it's just kind of advocate for yourself, get to resources, and just be confident. Like, I would never think, I'm like 20 years old, I'm travel nursing in Hawaii. Like, I'm so fortunate. And I inherited that from my mom. She's very ambitious. And I feel like, yeah, I'm a little too mature sometimes. I need to get back to being 20 and not try to rush things a lot, because I do that a lot with the other things. But that was just part of growing up at a young age and having to be independent at a young age and financially support myself at a young age. But I'm so thankful for the experience I'm learning here. I'm working at a Japanese oriented hospital, and I work with alongside a lot of Filipinos, people from Japan, and Micronesians. So I got to really learn a lot about the Asian cultures. And how did I get here? I just went like crazy on the internet, looking, researching. I was already certified, and I was like, this isn't impossible for me. I have the qualifications for this. I worked a year. I can just pack my things and go. Yeah, I don't have that much saved, but you know, I'm qualifying for the same role as someone else who's done it for 10 years. I'm working alongside with people that could be my grandma, and they have the same position as me. But it's a really grateful experience. Like, I think the culture here is a lot different than the past places I've worked at. It's very family oriented, and I feel like you really look at your coworkers, even if they're older and they have the same position as you. I see them as like my elder, my auntie. We call them Adi and auntie. I learned a lot of little catchphrases here. But yeah, don't sell yourself short, and just don't be afraid to be like, oh, I'm so young, I don't know if I qualify for this. Just take that extra step and just rip the Band-Aid off and go for it.
And I think it's multiple. Like, every time you pass an exam, every time you complete a paper and you do it, I think taking that time to reflect and to go, I did do this. Like, I did complete this. Oh my gosh. And then I completed this class. Oh my gosh. I think it's that repetition of saying it again and again, and not just getting through it and then figuring out after you've gotten your degree, but saying it each time. I did do this. I am able to be here. I deserve to be here. And then the other side, I think as faculty, we need to keep telling the students every time they've succeeded, we need to point that out. You can do this. You are able to achieve this. If you struggle, it's like, okay, well, what resources are you going to use so that it's less of a struggle next time? Or maybe you need to plan differently with your time or something. But it's like, you can do this. Look at it. Or if a student rewrites a paper, they're like, oh, I had to rewrite it. Yes, because that's what we all do. And I think sometimes also modeling that, I keep hearing that modeling piece. We do need to model for them. This is what most of us do. I don't just write something the first time and it's amazing. I write it numerous times. And if it's really important, I send it to several people and I have them edit it as well. And I think students are like, so you didn't just write this, or you didn't just do, no, this has been many editions of it. And that still means I'm successful because I knew how to ask for that help to get where I needed to go. So I do think it's important that faculty keep pointing out to students so that students believe in themselves, because I think confidence, it's nice if you say it, but I also think you need to hear it from others. And if faculty don't do that, I think we're doing a disservice to any student.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And one more thing that I would add that faculty need to say, and I'm going to say it right now, is students are not the only ones that are feeling imposter syndrome. It does not go. So this is like the bad news and the good news. The bad news is it doesn't go away. Like, I still feel it. You know, I still feel it from where I'm sitting. I think just knowing that, though, just knowing that, like, it's something that you know, follows you throughout, and that your faculty, who seem maybe so confident and maybe seem so smart and have articles written and lectures prepared and all that, they're feeling it too. They're feeling it at the same time. So that's what I always tell, like, oh, you're feeling like an imposter? Well, so am I. Let's just get through it together. Let's just do it.
We have one more question from our audience, and it's about how we can best create a space that is open and inclusive to first gen students. So specifically thinking about Regis, but really in our roles, how can we best create that space? And kind of talked about it a little bit right now, but if you want to offer one quick word of advice, then we can close with that.
Yeah, stop shaming students for not knowing. I ask students a question. I say, "Are you familiar?" And it's a light question where students can say yes or no, and they'll say somewhat or a little bit, and then I could just go into it. I say, I'll break it down to you. And so that's providing the space within that space with you and the person, right? Because that's where those intimate conversations where you can uplift the student or destroy a student right there in that whisper. That's that critical moment. And so, I would say stop shaming students for not knowing, and then be vulnerable with students too, and let them know, how we were saying, I'm still in imposter syndrome as well. Yeah, I let students know all the time. I had a tutor in math all of my college career. Like, I knew it so much, my professor started sending the work to her because he knew I would come there after class. So I think when you share those stories with students, that creates the space and the culture that it's okay for everybody here. Like, if you know, you don't know. If you do know, somebody's going to show it to you. Somebody's going to tell you. You don't feel like you can't ask those questions. So I would share that with creating just an overall college environment, letting students know that they're welcome there. And breaking down stuff, like if you break down acronyms, that kind of lets students know, hey, I didn't know what that means. Maybe write Bursa everywhere for people. Those are some tips I have.
Yeah, I was thinking about the it kind of goes both ways, right? So like, how do we create that atmosphere? And then the sort of reverse side of that question is, for students, sort of how do they sort of fit into that? And my advice is, and it's just, there's no better place to go for advice, I think, than Mr. Rogers. And what is it that Mr. Rogers always says that that his mom, I guess, said to him, that you look for the helpers, right? And so that's my take is, in the college environment, like, be, for the faculty who to create that space, be a helper, right? Be available. Be vulnerable with your students and let them know, like, especially for those of us that are first gen ourselves, it's so easy to just say, I was there, I get that, I'm totally with you. But even for faculty who are not first gen, just make yourself available. And I think, not to toot Regis's horn too much, which is a weird expression, but anyways, I think Regis is really good at that. I think the faculty here are helpers, they are available. But then, yeah, for the flip side of that, for the students, just look for those people and don't be afraid to ask. We've been saying that all along. Don't be afraid to advocate for yourself and to ask for that help. Knowing that your faculty, that's what we're here for. So that's what I would say.
Yes, I would say use your resources, and be involved on campus. I'm happy I'm part of the SNA club. I want to become a nurse. That's my ultimate goal. And right now at SNA, like, even the professors are sending us resources about Boston Children's Hospital, looking for students to work with them, and Brigham and Women's. Like, in high school, I dream about ever being granted that opportunity, and that's like being presented to me right then and there. And that's very an amazing feeling to be granted an opportunity to work alongside one of the best hospitals, for sure.
And my 2 cents is, number one, that we even have this event going on, that there are people on campus clearly who are saying this is important, that we work with first generation. And it goes back to my other point, it's about relationships. And I think it goes with what people were saying here. Develop these relationships with your faculty members, with friends who may know more because maybe they've got a family member who's already gone through school, so they do know things. Find out from them. With all the amazing staff members that are on campus, again, it is about reaching out. And I think if you do that, I just think people will just be so much better off. I think, when you have that support, I think getting through school and getting through life just becomes so much more bearable.
Thank you, Henry. I feel like that's a great way to end our panel, really. I identify as a first gen student, and all of you shared insights that I know I could reflect with. So I'm looking forward to the conversation with our students who attended the event and seeing what they took away from your stories, and how even this experience just makes their time here a little more bearable and a little more understandable. So I don't know if you want to share anything else, Denise, and we can wrap it up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for being vulnerable with us, and for giving us a sneak peek into your experiences in your life, and all the great work that you all are doing as students and for students. So.
Yeah. So thank you so much. And we look forward to future events that our First Gen Task Force will be hosting, but specifically this week, where yesterday we celebrated National First Gen Day. This is an important celebration for us. So thank you for making it special.
Thank you for hosting it and for having us as a part.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, bye everyone. Take care.